It was 5:12 in the morning when he found her, asleep on a park bench, holding his baby. The woman he trusted most. The woman no one noticed. But what he didn't know was that this night would expose secrets buried for years and change his life forever. She wasn't supposed to be there. The baby wasn't supposed to be outside. And by the time the sun came up, everyone in that mansion would be asking the same question. Was this an act of love or something far more complicated? What began as a simple act of care would unravel a web of betrayal, love, and redemption that money could never buy. This is the story of a billionaire who had everything, a maid who had nothing, and the night that revealed what truly matters when everything falls apart. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why was his baby outside that night? What drove the maid to risk everything for a child that wasn't hers? And what secret about the billionaire's family would soon be exposed? These are the questions that would grip a city, divide a household, and force everyone involved to confront the truth about who they really were. The billionaire, Richard Morgan, was a man who controlled empires but couldn't control the chaos unfolding in his own home. Maria Santos, the maid, was a woman who had lost everything once before and refused to let it happen again. And the baby, little Emma, was the innocent center of it all, unaware that her life had just become the focal point of a story no one saw coming. Everyone in that house had something to lose and something to hide, but only one of them was willing to sacrifice everything. Richard Morgan wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up from a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit to a $50 million estate in the hills of Los Angeles. He built his fortune in tech, selling his first startup at 28 and never looking back. By 42, he had everything most people dreamed of: a mansion with 12 bedrooms, a collection of luxury cars, and a reputation that opened every door. But money didn't buy him peace. His marriage to Catherine was more business than love. They attended galas together, smiled for the cameras, and lived separate lives under the same roof. When Emma was born, Richard thought fatherhood might change him. It didn't. He was too busy building his next venture, too consumed by board meetings and investor calls to notice the small moments slipping away. He loved his daughter in theory, but in practice, he was a stranger in her life. Maria Santos arrived at the Morgan estate on a Tuesday in March, carrying a single suitcase and a heart full of ghosts. She was 53 years old, soft-spoken, with kind eyes that seemed to carry a sadness she never spoke about. She came highly recommended by an agency that specialized in placing domestic workers in wealthy homes. Her references were impeccable. Her background check was clean, but no one knew the real reason she took the job. Maria had lost her daughter, Sophia, 12 years earlier. Sophia was only 7 when she got sick, a fever that wouldn't break, a cough that turned into pneumonia. Maria worked 2 jobs back then, cleaning houses during the day and waiting tables at night, but it still wasn't enough to afford the medicine Sophia needed. By the time Maria scraped together the money, it was too late. Sophia died in her arms on a hospital bed that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Maria never forgave herself. She carried that guilt like a second heartbeat, quiet but constant, reminding her every single day that she had failed the one person who mattered most. When Maria saw Emma for the first time, something inside her shifted. The baby was 3 months old, with soft brown curls and eyes that seemed to search for something Maria understood all too well. Emma cried often, and no one seemed to know why. Catherine was overwhelmed and distant, spending most of her time at the spa or with friends. Richard was rarely home. The other staff members did their jobs, but nothing more. Maria, though, couldn't walk away. She started staying late in the nursery, rocking Emma to sleep, humming lullabies her own mother had sung to her as a child. She changed diapers, warmed bottles, and wiped tiny tears with a tenderness that came from a place of deep, unhealed wounds. The other staff noticed. Some thought it was sweet, others thought it was strange. Catherine mentioned it once to Richard over breakfast, her tone casual but laced with concern. "Don't you think Maria is a bit too attached to Emma?" Richard barely looked up from his phone. "She's doing her job. That's what we pay her for." But Maria wasn't doing it for the paycheck. She was doing it because every time she held Emma, she felt like she was getting a second chance. A chance to protect a child. A chance to be the mother she couldn't be for Sophia. She never said this out loud. She didn't need to. It was written in every gentle touch, every sleepless night, every moment she chose to stay when she could have left. And then came the night that everything changed. It started with the heater. The nursery had been cold for days, but no one had called for repairs. Catherine didn't notice. Richard didn't ask. The maintenance staff assumed someone else had handled it. By the time Maria realized the room was freezing, it was nearly midnight, and Emma was crying inconsolably. Maria wrapped the baby in 2 blankets, then 3, but nothing seemed to help. Emma's tiny body shivered, her cries piercing the silence of the sprawling mansion. Maria called the house manager. No answer. She knocked on Catherine's door. Locked. She even tried Richard's study, but he wasn't home. He was at a charity gala downtown, schmoozing with investors and posing for photos while his daughter suffered in the cold. Maria felt panic rising in her chest. She remembered Sophia's fever, the way her small body had trembled in the night, the helplessness that had consumed her. She couldn't let that happen again. Not to Emma, not to any child. So Maria made a decision. She wrapped Emma in her own wool shawl, the one her mother had given her decades ago, and carried the baby outside. The air was warmer there, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally breaking into a gentle drizzle. Maria walked to the garden, past the marble fountains and perfectly trimmed hedges, to a wooden bench near the rose bushes. She sat down, cradling Emma against her chest, and began to hum. The baby's cries softened, her breathing steadied. Maria rocked her gently, whispering promises she had once made to Sophia. "I won't let anything happen to you. I won't let you suffer. I'll keep you safe." The exhaustion Maria had been fighting for weeks finally caught up with her. Her eyes grew heavy. The sound of rain on leaves became a lullaby. And before she realized it, she was asleep, Emma nestled safely in her arms. Richard arrived home at 5 a.m, his bow tie loosened, his mind already running through emails he needed to send. He tossed his keys on the kitchen counter and walked upstairs, intending to check on Emma before heading to bed. But when he opened the nursery door, the crib was empty. His heart stopped. He called out for Catherine. No response. He ran down the hall, checking every room, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then he remembered the security cameras. He pulled up the footage on his phone, his hands shaking, and saw Maria leaving through the back door with Emma in her arms. His first thought was kidnapping. His second was betrayal. He bolted outside, scanning the dark garden, and then he saw them. Maria, asleep on the bench, her head tilted back, her arms wrapped protectively around his daughter. Emma was quiet, breathing softly, her tiny hand clutching Maria's shawl. Richard stood there, frozen, unsure whether to feel relief or rage. Part of him wanted to scoop Emma up and fire Maria on the spot. But another part of him, a quieter part he rarely listened to, noticed the way Maria held his daughter, like she was the most precious thing in the world, like she would die before letting anything happen to her. He approached slowly, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Maria's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked confused, and then she saw Richard, and the fear washed over her face. "Mr. Morgan, He held up a hand, cutting her off. "Inside. Now." His voice was cold, controlled, but underneath it was something else. Something he couldn't quite name. By 7 a.m, the entire household was awake. Catherine stood in the foyer, arms crossed, demanding answers. The other staff whispered in the kitchen, casting glances toward Maria's room. Richard paced back and forth in his study, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped tones to his lawyer. And Maria sat alone in the maid's quarters, her hands trembling, replaying the night over and over, wondering if she had just destroyed the only thing that gave her life meaning. The police arrived at 8:15. 2 officers, calm and professional, asked to speak with everyone individually. Richard insisted it was just a misunderstanding, but protocol required an investigation. Maria was questioned first. She answered every question honestly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. She explained the cold nursery, the unanswered calls, the decision to take Emma outside where it was warmer. She told them about Sophia, about the guilt she carried, about the promise she had made to never let another child suffer. The officers exchanged glances but took notes without judgment. Catherine was next. She admitted she hadn't checked on Emma that night, that she had taken a sleeping pill and hadn't heard anything. When asked if she trusted Maria, Catherine hesitated. "I don't know," she said finally. "She's always been too attached." Richard's interview was the longest. He defended Maria, explained her dedication, insisted there was no malice in her actions. But when the detective asked if he had any doubts, Richard went quiet. "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. The truth was, he barely knew the woman who had been living in his house for 6 months. He had never asked about her life, her past, her pain. She was just the help. And now she was at the center of a situation that could ruin his reputation. The media caught wind of the story by noon. "Billionaire's maid found sleeping outside with baby," screamed the headlines. Social media exploded with opinions. Some called Maria a hero. Others called her reckless. Richard's publicist went into damage control mode, issuing statements, arranging interviews, trying to spin the narrative. But the truth was messy, and no amount of PR could clean it up. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Detectives combed through Maria's room, looking for anything that might explain her actions. They found letters she had written to Sophia but never sent. They found a small photo album filled with pictures of a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. And they found a silver locket, tucked inside a jewelry box, with a faded photograph of a baby inside. It wasn't Emma. It was Sophia. When the detective showed the locket to Maria, she broke down. "I just wanted to protect her," she sobbed. "I couldn't save my own daughter, but I thought maybe I could save someone else's." The detective, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "You're not in trouble," she said gently. "But you need to understand how this looks. You need to understand why people are scared." Maria nodded, wiping her tears. "I know, I couldn't let her freeze. I couldn't." The detective believed her. But belief wasn't enough to stop the storm that was coming. If you're still watching, type, "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's really following this story. 3 days after the incident, Maria was called into Richard's study. She expected to be fired. Instead, Richard gestured for her to sit. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of the past few days had aged him. "Tell me about Sophia," he said quietly. Maria's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. She had prepared herself for anger, accusations, dismissal. But not this, not empathy. So she told him. She told him about the hospital bills she couldn't pay, the jobs she worked until her hands bled, the moment she realized she was too late. She told him about the guilt that never left, the nightmares that still woke her in the middle of the night, the way she saw Sophia's face every time she looked at Emma. "I'm not trying to replace her," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't let another child suffer, not if I could do something about it." Richard was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've spent my whole life building empires," he said, "but I never stopped to think about what I was losing along the way. I have everything, Maria. Everything except the things that actually matter." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You risked everything for my daughter, and I wasn't even there." Maria didn't know what to say. She had never seen this side of him, this raw, unguarded version of the man who seemed untouchable. "I'm sorry," Richard continued, "for not listening, for not seeing you, for not being the father Emma deserves." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. It's not much, but it's a start." Maria opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note that read, "For Sophia and for Emma." Maria's hands shook. "Mr. Morgan, I can't—" "Yes, you can," Richard interrupted gently. "And you will, because you deserve it, and because I should have done this a long time ago." Tears streamed down Maria's face. For the first time in 12 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a failure. Maybe she had done something right. Maybe Sophia would be proud. Richard stood and extended his hand. "You're not just the help, Maria. You're family, and I hope you'll stay." Maria took his hand, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you." But this wasn't the end, not even close. 5 years passed. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who loved stories and couldn't fall asleep without Maria's lullabies. Richard and Catherine eventually divorced, their marriage unable to survive the cracks that had always been there. But Richard changed. He stepped back from his businesses, spent more time at home, became the father he had failed to be. And Maria stayed, not as a maid, but as the grandmother Emma never had. Richard kept his promise. He established the Sophia Santos Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping single mothers afford health care for their children. It started small, just a few grants here and there, but it grew. Within 3 years, the foundation had helped over 2,000 families. Maria never asked for recognition, but Richard made sure her story was told. Interviews were conducted, articles were written, and slowly the narrative shifted from scandal to redemption. But Maria's health began to decline. At 60, she was diagnosed with heart disease, the years of stress and heartbreak finally catching up with her. She spent her final months surrounded by love, in a room overlooking the garden where everything had changed. Emma visited every day, reading her stories, holding her hand, promising to remember everything Maria had taught her. On a quiet Sunday morning in April, Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep. Emma, now 8 years old, placed the silver locket with Sophia's picture on her grandmother's chest before the funeral. "So you can be with her again," Emma whispered through tears. At the funeral, Richard stood before a crowd of hundreds, people whose lives Maria had touched without ever seeking credit, and he said, "Maria taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we change, the love we give, and the sacrifices we make for those who can't fight for themselves." He revealed that in his will, half of his estate would go to the Sophia Santos Foundation, ensuring Maria's legacy would live on for generations. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Richard placed a single white rose on top. Emma stood beside him, clutching his hand, and whispered, "She saved me, didn't she, Daddy?" Richard nodded, his voice breaking. "She saved both of us." Years later, the Morgan estate became a center for community programs, a place where families in need could find support, hope, and second chances. Emma grew up understanding that the greatest privilege in life isn't what you have, but what you give. And every year on the anniversary of Maria's death, she returned to that bench in the garden, the one where her life was saved, and she whispered a thank you to the woman who risked everything. In the end, Richard found wealth in a place he never looked, the heart of the woman who had nothing except love. So what do you think really changed him that night? Was it guilt, or was it love? Was justice truly served, or was it redemption? Let us know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you thought this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in The Widow's Secret. Click the link to watch next. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal the power of love, faith, and redemption. Because sometimes the richest people are the ones who've lost everything except love.